Well, slowly in this way, the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, became my specialization. I started teaching about it. I became a member of the editorial board of a publication series of the Dutch Association of people who studied the Middle East. This was interdisciplinary, not just anthropologists. And I also started teaching about gender, because having done research on women in Algeria, I was invited at that time with all kinds of student groups who wanted to include more gender in teaching. And so slowly I developed into a gender specialist, and I must say it was a very exciting new field in anthropology at that time in the 1970s. All kinds of new books appeared, and I have one book that's up there. It's nearly falling apart. It's by Rainer Reiter, Towards an Anthropology of Women. And what was exciting about it, that it was critical of about everything. Critical about the person of the anthropologist. Does it make a difference whether you're a man or a woman? Does it make a difference how you talk? Do you talk differently? Do you ask different questions? Do you choose different topics? And so apart from the person, it was topical, new fields were broached, but also other fields were critically assessed. For instance, what do we mean if we talk about work? How do you define work in a way that it equally measures the work of women and men? And or how do you define a socio-economic status, for instance? Because at that time it was just ask, what do you earn or what do you own? But then we had what we call the Mrs. Phillips problem. Mrs. Phillips, the wife of the big industrialist, we assumed she didn't work, but she was very rich and of high socioeconomic status. But if you would ask her the same questions than if you would ask a man, then it would be totally different. So we see that in the meantime a lot of things have changed and adapted. So now they do not talk about the socioeconomic status of the individual, but of the family, in order to avoid certain problems that were brought up in the 70s and posed as a problem. And the same with medicine, for instance. In order to develop certain medicines, often women were not included in a research group because it was too difficult with their hormones and everything. So they just tested them on men, but then you have the problem that in the end, if the women get a disease or the children, they have to take that medicine. And also in heart surgery, they really find that a lot of we were talking about the techniques of the microphone being designed to be interviewing men and not women. And in a similar way, a lot of the apparatus was designed for men and not for women, like tools. So the concepts were critically assessed. The theories were critically assessed, and a very great article was that of Gail Rubin and on the politics of sex, and she combined Lévi-Strauss with how do I call it, Marcel Mauss on the kinship exchange and the exchange of women, and was the first one to ask the question, what does it really do for women, and how does it determine in a way the sexuality of women, or how women's sexuality should look like. So it was just wonderful. Politics, the Western preconceptions of how politics are organized. In this case, for instance, in Africa, and you have this matrilineal political system next to a patrilineal political system, and one anthropologist once discovered that the king, for instance, was appointed through the female line, and he said, "Why did I never know about it?" And then the people answered, "You never asked us." So all this came up, and for me it was kind of very exciting. So I continued with the gender bit, and later it resulted in me changing when I lost my job at the anthropology department and going over to the Institute for Gender Studies. But before it was that far, first I had to go and do my PhD, of course. So I decided to go back to Algeria. And I had noted while being in the village that there were a few women who did things you did not expect of them, like sitting in the polling station or being politically active. And I mean, this was a village where all the women were heavily veiled and just with a hike, and you could only see one eye. So it was quite exceptional to see an unveiled woman and see her do things and organize things. So I thought, well, if I go back, I have to go to a place, a larger place. So I chose a large town on the other side of the country in the west of Algeria, and looked for women who did something special. And then somehow it turned out that all these women who did something special, not all of them, but many of them, were widows or divorcees or daughters of widows or divorcees. So in the end, I wrote a book about it, Women Without Men, Gender and Marginality in an Algerian Town. And they were not all really without men in the sense, of course, they had their family of birth, and according to dominant ideology, when a woman is widowed or divorced, then she returns to the family. But then the problem is that the family doesn't always want them, especially not if they have children. And moreover, many of these widows were bewidowed because of the war. So they were the widows of the Mujahideen. And the Algerian government had arranged for them to be able to find a job. So they had special quota at state companies. They needed to have a certain percentage of these women, and as a result, also other divorcees and women and widowed women profited from this opportunity. And in my book, I describe all kinds of professions they do, and with professions I mean activities to stay alive, because only a small part of them actually went out to work for a paid wage. But the others, they were washers in the bathhouse, they were sorcerers, they were singers at saints' festivals, they were prostitutes, they were musicians that performed at weddings, and in a way, they were considered marginal in society, and somehow the concepts of widow or divorcee and, say, washer of the dead or working woman conflated. So if you saw a working woman, they would say she's a divorcee, whether she was divorced or not. But that word in itself became a word of marginality in society. And for that reason, and also the women themselves, they were a little bit hesitant to talk about it, as you can imagine. So I used pseudonyms, which maybe now is gone out of fashion in anthropology, because everyone has to approve everything and signed permits that you can use what they say, and they all knew I was writing a book, but I made sure, or they made sure that I knew what the rules were. and one of the rules was, for instance, that I did not disclose their name or their faces. I remember once in the village I'd taken a photograph of two village women. They were neighbors and friends, and I presented them each with the picture, and the first thing they did, to my big surprise, was rip the picture apart, because otherwise they couldn't show it to their husband, because the husband was not allowed to see the other woman. And so that also meant I could take very little pictures, only far to the end, when I was really integrated in certain families and I knew the rules, then they would allow me to take pictures for a wedding, for instance. And that was also interesting. But at this wedding I knew that that the bride actually loved someone else, and I had taken a picture of the one she loved because he was a cousin, so he was at the betrothal ceremony, and I took also the other pictures of the whole wedding. And after the wedding I came to their home, and of course everyone was there. Everyone wanted to see the picture, and I saw her already getting a little bit nervous because she knew but I'd taken them out and went to the kitchen in order to give her the other pictures. And so in a way you have to know the rules before you're allowed to do that. And even up to now, people don't put their image on Facebook, or they use little cats or flowers or whatever, so it shouldn't be made public. So that was my PhD, and what happened then, and later I came back. One point is interesting to illustrate. One, and I also wrote some articles about that, is about women who stand like a man. A few months ago, a Dutch actor came to me with a beautiful old picture from the early, I think in the 1920s. And he was very much surprised, because it was a really beautiful picture of a woman standing by herself outside, no veils, fully clothed in beautiful, colorful dresses, and lots of golden crown, and standing straight, looking him directly, or looking the photographer directly into the face, one hand on her hip and the other hand with a cigarette. So he said, well, could you tell me, and it was COVID time, so I was welcome any distraction, and I said, this is a beautiful question, because he wanted me to explain this picture, because he thought he had found an unknown Algerian matriarchy. He said, are there matriarchal tribes? Because she stands there like a queen outside. And he was very disappointed to hear from me that this was a very typical picture done by lots of photographers, Orientalist photographers and painters in the 1920s, 30s, of a Nailia. The Ouled Nail are a tribe where the women are very free, and they, in groups headed by a matron, they go out and dance and sing for people, and sometimes more. And actually, because of the colonization by the French, the trade deteriorated, and they were put together in brothels, and they are, were plainly used as prostitutes. So they would have a performance early in the evening, fully dressed for everyone and for all the tourists, and then later in the evening, for extra money, they would have nude performances and all that. And it's interesting because in the picture, the woman stands like a man, so she takes up the position of a man, the symbols of a man, the richness of a man, the privilege of smoking a cigarette. Actually, a cigarette became a symbol of prostitution, yes. So if I would want to draw attention from a man outside, the first that she's outside, standing on the threshold or standing in the street, is already a symbol of prostitution. And the problem, of course, is that this shifts to other women. So other women who have to be in the street in order to go to work, they are considered prostitutes. It has consequences also for the anthropologist, because if I'm going out in the street, you can imagine, you know, they see me as sexual bait. And so the shifting is very problematic for normal Algerian women or young Algerian women who want to go out and study, and all these symbolic meanings. But also what's interesting for my analysis was this threshold, this taking over spaces and postures that are considered male, and by doing so women can give certain signs that are recognized by everyone. And sometimes it's quite confusing in real life, because the messages are not really well read. And actually this is happening up till now, because I would ask decent women how you would recognize a prostitute if everyone is veiled. So in the end I could recognize fully veiled women as prostitutes by the way they walk and the way they tie their hike around themselves, and that was the whole theoretical argument of my thesis. People take opposites in order to define themselves. So you are a good woman if you do not do this or that, if you do not stand in the street. Like if my landlady wanted to say of me, oh, she's a very good woman, she would say, oh, she never stands on the balcony. And for me, the balcony was beautiful to look at the world below. Or she would say, she's never out in the street. And of course, I was out in the street all the time visiting people. But just the idea of what I was not indicated what the norms were. So I was looking at the construction of the norms by their opposites, and how, see, norms are not stable, they're in flux, they change all the times, including gender norms. So what men and women have to do is constantly under pressure or constantly under stress, and so people have to constantly construct them and show them how you have to behave, but they do so by pointing out how you should not behave. And all these marginal women actually were used to define a good woman, a good wife. A good wife does all these things that all these marginal women don't do. And yeah, that was very interesting to do.